"Mom, did you already decide how much you're giving us for the wedding?" I remember the exact moment my son asked that question. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a dish towel in my hands, staring at the sink like it had suddenly become something unfamiliar. For a second, I thought I had misheard him, that maybe I was getting older, slower to catch words the way I used to. "How much I'm giving you?" I repeated. Across the table, my son Ethan shifted in his chair. Beside him, his fiancée, Lauren, smiled, sweet, polished, the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "For the wedding," she added gently, "we talked about it last week. Ethan said you were going to help." I hadn't agreed to anything. Not like that. I felt something tighten in my chest. But I kept my voice steady. I said I'd see what I could do. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table, the same way he used to when he was a boy asking for permission to stay out late. "Right," he said, "and we figured the easiest thing would be your retirement fund." The words landed quietly, too quietly. My retirement fund. Not a little help. Not a contribution. My retirement fund. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to reconcile the man sitting in front of me with the boy I had raised. "I'm glad you're here," I said after a moment, forcing a small smile. "Stay with me until the end of this story, and tell me where you're listening from." I never imagined something so simple could change the way I saw my own family. The kitchen felt different that afternoon. The sunlight coming through the window was the same. The hum of the refrigerator unchanged. But something had shifted, something I couldn't quite name yet. "Mom," Ethan said again, softer this time, "it's not like you'll need all of it. You've always been careful. You'll be fine." Lauren reached over and placed her hand on his arm, as if to soften the blow. Or maybe to guide it. "We're not asking for everything," she said, "just enough to make the day special. It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment." Once in a lifetime. I had moments like that too. I thought of the day I married my husband. The years we spent building a life. Saving carefully. Putting money aside dollar by dollar so that one day, I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. Especially not my children. I folded the dish towel slowly. Buying myself time. My hands didn't shake. They never do when something truly matters. "How much?" I asked quietly. "Do you think that is?" Ethan exchanged a quick glance with Lauren. A silent conversation passed between them, one I wasn't meant to hear. But could feel all the same. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "we were thinking, most of it. We'd still leave you enough for your basic needs, of course." "Of course." I nodded once, as if I understood. As if this was reasonable. As if nothing about this moment felt like the ground beneath my feet was shifting in a way I couldn't undo. And that was when I realized something. This wasn't a spontaneous request. This had been discussed, planned, agreed upon, just not with me. I placed the towel neatly on the counter and looked at my son. "Let me think about it," I said. But inside, something had already begun to change. Because for the first time, I wasn't asking myself how I could help them. I was asking myself, why they thought I should. For the past 5 years, I had lived a very simple life. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. After my husband passed, the house felt too big, too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you, it reminds you of everything that's missing. So I adjusted. I learned to live with less noise, fewer expectations, and a lot more silence. I made my coffee every morning at exactly 7 a.m. Saturday by the same window, watched the same patch of sunlight move slowly across the kitchen floor. Routine became my way of holding things together. Money, too, became something I treated carefully. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Every dollar in my retirement fund had a memory attached to it. Late nights my husband worked overtime, vacations we didn't take, little things we said no to, so that one day we could say yes to peace. That fund wasn't just money. It was security, independence, dignity. And I had protected it quietly. The same way I had protected my family for decades, without asking for recognition. Ethan never really saw that part of our life. When he was growing up, we made sure of it. He had what he needed. New shoes before the school year started. A warm jacket every winter. College tuition paid without him ever seeing the numbers behind it. We never wanted him to feel the weight of what things cost. Maybe that was our mistake. After he moved out, things changed slowly. At first, it was just fewer phone calls. Then shorter visits. Holidays became something we had to schedule, instead of something that simply happened. And then Lauren came into his life. She was charming, polite, always said the right things. But there was something about the way she looked at me, not unkind. Not disrespectful, just measured. As if she was always calculating something I couldn't quite see. I ignored it. Because that's what mothers do. We ignore small discomforts to keep the peace. But that afternoon, after they left my house, I didn't return to my usual routine. I didn't make tea, I didn't turn on the television. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the chair where Ethan had been sitting. Most of it, he had said. Not help, not support. Most of it. I tried to replay the conversation in my head, to find the moment where I might have misunderstood, where I might have said something that led him to believe that was even an option. But there was nothing. Only one realization, settling deeper with each passing minute. They hadn't asked because they needed help. They had asked because they believed they were entitled to it. That thought didn't make me angry. It made me still. The kind of stillness that comes before something shifts inside you. I stood up eventually and walked to the hallway closet. From the top shelf, I pulled down an old file box, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents, statements, records. My retirement account, insurance policies, the will my husband and I had signed together. I ran my fingers over the papers, feeling the weight of decisions made long ago. Back then, everything had been simple. We assumed our son would grow up, build his own life, and respect what we had built before him. We never imagined a day where he would sit across from me and calmly suggest taking it away. I closed the box slowly. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about how to keep things the same. I was thinking about what needed to change. The next Sunday, they invited me to dinner. That alone felt unusual. Ethan rarely insisted on plans anymore. Most of the time, I was the one asking, suggesting lunch, offering to stop by, trying to stay connected in small, quiet ways that didn't feel like pressure. But this time, the invitation came from them. "Mom, we'd love for you to come over," Lauren had said over the phone, her voice warm, almost rehearsed. "We want to talk more about the wedding." Talk more. I arrived at exactly 5 p.m., the way I always do. I brought a small dessert, nothing extravagant. Just a lemon pie from the bakery down the street. It felt like the right thing to do. Lauren opened the door with a bright smile. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said, though her eyes dropped briefly to the box in my hands. "I wanted to," I replied. The house smelled like roasted chicken and something sweet, maybe glazed carrots. Everything looked perfect. The table was already set. Candles lit. Wine poured. Too perfect. Ethan greeted me with a quick hug. Distracted, his attention already shifting back to the kitchen where Lauren stood. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. "Have a seat." I sat at the table and folded my hands in my lap. Taking in the details, the matching plates, the polished silverware, the way everything seemed carefully arranged, like a scene prepared in advance. We ate for a few minutes in polite conversation. Weather, work, the venue they had chosen for the wedding. Then, as if on cue, Lauren set down her fork. "We've been going over the budget," she said gently, "and things are tighter than we expected." Ethan nodded, not looking at me. "Venues are expensive," he added, "and with everything we want to include, it adds up fast." I didn't respond. I simply took a sip of water and waited. Lauren leaned forward slightly, her tone soft, almost sympathetic. "We just want the day to be beautiful," she said, "something everyone will remember." There it was again. Not a question. A setup. Ethan finally looked at me. "Did you have a chance to think about what we talked about?" I set my glass down carefully. "I did," I said. They both went still. Not nervous, not uncertain. Expectant. As if the outcome had already been decided. "I've been reviewing my finances," I continued, trying to understand exactly what I can afford. Lauren's shoulders relaxed slightly, just for a moment. A flicker of satisfaction crossed her face before she smoothed it away. "That's wonderful," she said quickly. "We really appreciate you taking this seriously." "Taking this seriously?" I nodded once. "Of course," I said. But as I looked at them, really looked this time, I began to notice things I had overlooked before. The way Ethan deferred to Lauren before speaking, the way she answered questions that weren't directed at her, the way their conversations seemed to move forward without ever truly including me. This wasn't just about money. This was alignment. Planning. A shared understanding I had never been part of. "How much were you thinking?" I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated, just long enough to make it seem like he was being careful. "Well," he said, "we went over the numbers again. And honestly, if we had access to most of the fund, we could do everything the right way. No stress, no compromises. Most of it." Again. Lauren reached for his hand, squeezing it lightly. "We'd still make sure you're taken care of," she added. "You wouldn't have to worry about anything." I held her gaze for a moment. And for the first time, I didn't see kindness. I saw assumption. They weren't asking anymore. They were reassuring me about a decision they believed I had already made. I gave a small, polite smile. "I understand," I said. And in that moment, I did. Not just what they wanted, but who they had become. That night, after I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I stood in the hallway, my hand still resting on the door, listening to the silence settle around me. The kind of silence that used to feel lonely, but now felt different. Clearer. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down in the same armchair my husband used to favor. For a long time, I just looked at the empty space across from me, as if I could still see him there, reading his newspaper, adjusting his glasses, asking me simple questions about the day. We had built everything together. Every dollar in that retirement fund had a story behind it. I could still remember the small conversations we used to have at the kitchen table late at night. "Maybe we skip the trip this year," he'd say, "put it away instead." And I would nod, even when I wanted that trip, even when I was tired. Because we were building something. Not just for comfort but for security. For the day when we would no longer have to rely on anyone else. Especially not our children. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. For years, I had told myself that Ethan didn't need to understand those sacrifices. That it was enough for him to live freely, without worrying about money the way we once had. But now, I began to wonder if that had been a mistake. Because somewhere along the way, freedom had turned into expectation. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. The photos on the wall told a different story. Ethan as a boy, holding his first baseball glove, Ethan at his college graduation, smiling, proud Ethan standing between me and his father, one arm around each of us. Back then, there had been no distance, no calculation, just trust. So when did it change? I thought back over the years, letting the memories come without forcing them. The first time he asked for money after college, just a small loan the way he had promised to pay it back, and never did. The time Lauren suggested a family vacation, that I ended up covering almost entirely, the quiet expectation that I would say yes. Because I always had. Each moment had seemed small on its own. Reasonable. Temporary. But now, sitting there in the dim light of my living room, I could see the pattern clearly. It hadn't started with the wedding. It had been building for years. Little assumptions, small justifications, a gradual shift from appreciation to entitlement. I stood up and walked to the cabinet where I kept my documents. For a moment, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the drawer. Inside were the papers my husband and I had signed together years ago. Our will. Back then, it had felt like a formality. Something responsible people did. We had written Ethan's name down without hesitation. Without conditions. Because that's what parents do. We trust. I pulled the drawer open and took the folder out, placing it carefully on the table. The paper felt heavier than I remembered. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I sat down and opened it slowly, scanning the familiar lines, the signatures at the bottom. Everything was exactly as we had left it. Simple. Straightforward. Certain. I closed the folder and rested my hand on top of it. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask a question I had avoided for years. What happens when trust is no longer enough? I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt in the way I expected. I felt awake. And that realization was quieter than any argument, but far more permanent. Because for the first time, I wasn't looking at my past. I was thinking about my future. And who truly belonged in it. The next morning, I drove to the bank. It wasn't something I had planned the night before. I simply woke up, made my coffee, and realized I didn't want to sit in uncertainty any longer. If there was something I didn't understand, I would understand it. That much, at least, I owed myself. The parking lot was half full when I arrived. Familiar, ordinary. I had been coming to this branch for over 20 years. Back when my husband still handled most of our finances and I simply accompanied him, trusting that everything was taken care of. Now, I walked in alone. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter." The teller greeted me with a polite smile. "How can we help you today?" "I'd like to review my retirement account," I said. She nodded and led me to a small office in the back. A younger man joined us shortly after, Daniel. His name tag read. He had the careful tone of someone trained to explain things clearly. But not too deeply unless asked. "What would you like to go over?" he asked. "Everything," I replied. He paused, just for a second, then nodded. For the next 20 minutes, he walked me through the details. Balances, withdrawals, restrictions, the structure of the account my husband and I had built slowly over decades. I listened without interrupting. Until something caught my attention. "There were inquiries made about this account recently," Daniel said, scrolling through the records. "Just general questions about early withdrawal and transfer options." I felt my hand still in my lap. "Inquiries?" I repeated. "Yes," he said. "Nothing was changed, of course. But someone called asking about access, what would be required, what permissions are needed." "Did they identify themselves?" I asked. Daniel clicked again, then hesitated. "They said they were calling on behalf of family." He answered carefully, "But they didn't have authorization. So no information was disclosed." "Family." I didn't ask the name. I didn't need to. "Thank you," I said quietly. He continued explaining the rest. But I wasn't really listening anymore. Not because I didn't care, but because something had already become clear. This hadn't started at dinner. It hadn't even started last week. They had already taken steps. Careful ones, quiet ones. Testing the edges of something that didn't belong to them. When the meeting ended, Daniel handed me a printed summary of my account. I folded it neatly and placed it in my purse. As I stood up to leave, he added gently, "If you ever want to update beneficiaries or make changes to your plan, we can help with that as well." I paused. "Update beneficiaries," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "It's something we recommend reviewing every few years. Circumstances change. Circumstances change." I gave a small nod. "I'll keep that in mind." The drive home felt different. Not heavier. Clearer. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't wondering anymore if I had misunderstood my son. I wasn't trying to justify his words or soften their meaning. I was thinking about something else entirely. Not what they wanted, but what they had already assumed they would get. I walked into the house, set my purse on the table, and took out the folder I had reviewed the night before. My will. I placed it next to the bank documents and looked at both of them for a long moment. For years, these papers had represented security. Now, they represented something else. Choice. And for the first time in a very long time, I realized that choice still belonged to me. The first call I made wasn't to my son. It was to a lawyer. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my hand for a long moment before dialing. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this meant. Once I did this, there would be no going back to the way things were. "Good morning, Carter and Wells Law Office." A calm voice answered. "My name is Margaret Carter," I said. "I'd like to review and possibly update my will." There was no hesitation in my voice. None at all. They scheduled me for the next afternoon. The office was downtown, in a building I had passed countless times but never entered. Clean glass doors, quiet hallways, The kind of place where decisions are made without raised voices. My attorney, Mr. Reynolds, was older than I expected. Not by much, but enough to recognize something in me without needing it explained. "What brings you in today, Mrs. Carter?" he asked gently. I placed my documents on the desk. My will, my retirement statements. "I believe my circumstances have changed," I said. He nodded once, as if he had heard that sentence many times before. "Let's take a look," he replied. For the next hour, we went through everything. The will my husband and I had signed years ago. The structure of my estate. The beneficiaries listed without conditions, because back then, we had never imagined needing them. "Your son is currently the primary beneficiary," Mr. Reynolds said, adjusting his glasses. "Everything transfers to him. Everything." I folded my hands in my lap. "And if I wanted to change that?" I asked. He didn't look surprised. "That is entirely your right," he said. "You can revise beneficiaries, create conditions, or redirect assets altogether." Conditions. The word lingered in the air longer than the others. "What kind of conditions?" I asked. Mr. Reynolds leaned back slightly. "For example," he said, "you could specify that assets are distributed only under certain circumstances. Or you could assign portions to different individuals, or even organizations." I thought about Ethan. About the way he had sat across from me, calmly explaining how much of my retirement I wouldn't need. I thought about the phone call to the bank. The inquiries. The assumptions. "I don't want conflict," I said quietly. Mr. Reynolds gave a small, understanding smile. "Most of my clients don't," he replied. "They want clarity." Clarity. That was the word. I nodded slowly. "Then I'd like to make some changes," I said. We worked through the details carefully. Not quickly. Not emotionally. Precisely. I asked questions I had never thought to ask before. About control. About timing. About what happens before and after I'm gone. And for the first time, I wasn't thinking like a mother trying to give. I was thinking like someone responsible for protecting what she had built. When we finished, Mr. Reynolds placed the revised documents in front of me. "You don't have to sign today," he said. "Take time to think about it if you'd like." I looked down at the papers. Then I picked up the pen. "I've already thought about it," I said. And I signed. When I stepped back out into the afternoon light, nothing looked different. The same streets, the same passing cars, the same quiet rhythm of the day. But something inside me had shifted. Not anger. Not regret. Control. Because for the first time since that conversation at my kitchen table, I wasn't reacting to what my family expected from me. I had decided what I expected from them. A few days passed before I heard from them again. Not a visit. Not a call to ask how I was doing. A message. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Did you make any decisions about the wedding budget?" I read it once, then again. No mention of our last conversation. No hesitation. No awareness that anything about it might have crossed a line. Just a follow-up. As if we were discussing a shared expense. I set the phone down on the table and let the silence sit for a while. Then I picked it back up and typed a short reply. "I'm still reviewing things. I'll let you know soon." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Okay, great. We're meeting with the venue next week. So timing would really help." Of course it would. I didn't respond after that. Later that afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store. Nothing unusual, just milk, bread, a few things for the week. But halfway down one of the aisles, I heard a familiar voice. "Oh, Margaret?" I turned to see Carol, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to in a while. She smiled warmly, stepping closer with her cart. "I saw Ethan and Lauren the other day," she said. "They mentioned the wedding. It sounds like it's going to be beautiful." I returned the smile. "I'm sure it will be." Carol nodded enthusiastically. "They were saying how helpful you've been. That you're making a lot of it possible." I didn't speak right away. "They said that?" I asked. "Oh yes," she replied casually. "Lauren mentioned you'd already stepped in financially. Said it was such a blessing." A blessing. I felt something settle into place, not sharp. Not emotional. Just certain. "I see," I said quietly. We exchanged a few more polite words before parting ways. But I barely registered them. My mind had already moved ahead, connecting something I hadn't fully understood before. They weren't waiting for my decision. They had already told people the outcome. That evening, I sat at my desk with the documents from my lawyer spread out in front of me. I read through them again, slower this time. Every clause, every detail, every choice I had made. There it was in clear language, what would happen. And to whom. No confusion, no assumptions. Just structure. I reached for my reading glasses and adjusted them slightly, focusing on one particular section. The beneficiaries. The names listed there were no longer what they had been a week ago. I traced the lines with my finger, not out of doubt, but to feel the finality of it. For years, I had believed that love alone was enough to guide decisions like this. That family meant automatic trust. Automatic inheritance. But now, I understood something different. Inheritance wasn't about obligation. It was about alignment. Values. Respect. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't trying to figure out what they were thinking. I already knew. And more importantly, I knew what I had already done about it. The following week, I didn't wait for them to call me. I called them. "Why don't you both come by on Sunday?" I said calmly. "We can talk about everything properly." There was a pause on the other end, brief, but noticeable. Then Lauren's voice, light and pleased. "That sounds perfect." Of course it did. Sunday afternoon arrived quietly. I set the table the same way I always had. 3 plates, matching silverware, a simple meal, nothing extravagant, nothing lacking. Everything in its place. By the time they arrived, I was already seated. Ethan walked in first, relaxed, confident. Lauren followed, carrying a bottle of wine she placed on the counter without asking where it should go. "Mom," Ethan said, leaning in to hug me. "Thanks for doing this." I smiled lightly. "Of course." We sat down, and for a few minutes, everything followed the same familiar pattern. Small talk, polite laughter, the kind of surface-level conversation that fills space but says nothing. Until it didn't. Ethan cleared his throat. "So," he began, glancing briefly at Lauren, "did you have a chance to finalize things?" There it was. Not if. Not what I thought. Finalize. I folded my napkin slowly and placed it beside my plate. "I did," I said. Both of them straightened slightly. Lauren's fingers tightened just a little around her glass. "Well?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I looked at them, really looked. At the expectation in Ethan's eyes, at the quiet anticipation in Lauren's posture. They weren't anxious. They were waiting to hear how much. "I've reviewed my finances," I continued, "spoken to the bank, gone over everything carefully." Ethan nodded, almost approvingly. "That's great, Mom. That's exactly what we needed." Needed. I let that word pass without reaction. "And I've also taken care of some legal matters," I added. That made Lauren pause. "Legal?" she asked, just slightly too quickly. "Yes," I said. I thought it was time to make sure everything was properly structured. Ethan gave a small shrug. "Sure, that makes sense. As long as it doesn't delay anything on our end." Delay. Their world was moving forward, with or without me. Or so they thought. I reached for my glass of water, taking a slow sip before setting it back down. "I won't be withdrawing from my retirement fund," I said calmly. The silence that followed was immediate. Ethan blinked. "What?" "I won't be using it for the wedding," I repeated. Lauren set her glass down a little too hard. "Margaret," she said, her tone still polite but tighter now. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. We weren't asking you to give it up. We were talking about an investment in the family." "Investment?" I almost smiled. "I understand exactly what you were asking," I said. Ethan leaned forward, his voice changing, not louder, but sharper. "Mom, this is important to us. We're trying to build something here. You always said family supports each other." I held his gaze. "I did," I said. "And I meant it." There was a long pause. Then Lauren spoke again, softer this time, but with something underneath it. "So, if not the fund, then what are you willing to contribute?" There it was again. Not if. What? I folded my hands in front of me. I've already made the necessary decisions, I said. And for the first time since they walked in, I watched uncertainty begin to replace expectation. Ethan was the first to break the silence. What do you mean, necessary decisions? He asked, his voice no longer calm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached beside me and picked up a simple folder I had placed on the table earlier. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. I slid it gently toward them. Lauren looked at it first, then at me. What is this? Something I reviewed this week, I said. Ethan opened the folder, his movements slower now, careful. Inside were copies, not everything, just enough. Enough to make things clear. I watched his eyes move across the page. The shift was subtle at first. A pause, a tightening in his jaw, then something else. Confusion. What is this? He asked again, sharper this time. My updated estate documents, I replied. Lauren leaned in closer, reading over his shoulder. Her expression changed more quickly. That doesn't make sense, she said. Why are we not listed here the same way? There it was. Not concern. Not curiosity. Correction. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. Because I made changes, I said. Ethan looked up at me then. Really looked this time. What kind of changes? He asked. The kind that reflect my current circumstances. Lauren let out a short breath. Almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. Margaret, she said, choosing her words carefully. This feels reactive. I think we should talk this through before you make permanent decisions. Reactive. As if this had been sudden. As if I hadn't spent days thinking, reviewing, understanding. I have talked it through, I said quietly, with the appropriate people. Ethan pushed the papers slightly away from him. So what, you're punishing us now? He asked. The word hung in the air. Punishing. I shook my head once. No, I said, I'm protecting myself. Silence again. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. Lauren straightened in her chair. Her tone shifting, not softer, but more direct. This isn't fair, she said. We're your family. We're building a future together. You can't just cut us out because of one conversation. One conversation. I looked at her for a long moment. It wasn't one conversation, I said. Ethan frowned. Then what was it? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list everything. I didn't need to. It was the assumption, I said simply, the certainty that what I have already belongs to you. Neither of them spoke. Because there was nothing to correct. Nothing to soften. Only the truth, sitting there between us. I gently slid the folder back toward myself. These are copies, I added. The originals are already filed. Lauren's composure slipped, just for a second. You already finalized this? She asked. Yes. Ethan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. You didn't even tell us, he said. I met his eyes. You didn't ask, I replied. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just permanently. Ethan stood up first. Not abruptly. Not angrily. Just unsettled. This doesn't feel right, he said, pacing a few steps away from the table. You're making a huge decision without even considering how it affects us. I remained seated. I did consider that, I replied. Lauren crossed her arms, her posture tightening. Then how could you go through with it? She asked. We're talking about your own son. I looked at her, then back at Ethan. I am aware, I said. The room felt smaller somehow. The air heavier, filled with things that hadn't been said for years, and now didn't need to be. Ethan turned back to me, frustration finally surfacing. So that's it? He asked. You just change everything because we asked for help? Help. I let that word sit between us. You didn't ask for help, I said calmly. You asked for control. His expression hardened. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. It's accurate. Lauren stepped in quickly. We never said we wanted control. She insisted. We were trying to build something meaningful. And we thought family would be part of that. And I am, I replied. They both paused. Just not in the way you expected. Ethan exhaled sharply. running his hand over his face. "You're overreacting," he said. "It was just a conversation. People talk about finances all the time." I nodded once. "They do," I agreed. "But they don't usually make plans around money that isn't theirs." That stopped him. Not because he didn't understand, but because he did. Lauren's voice softened again, but there was urgency behind it now. "Margaret, we can fix this," she said. "If something came across the wrong way, we can talk about it. We don't need to make permanent changes over a misunderstanding." I watched her carefully. She still believed this was reversible. Negotiable. "I didn't misunderstand," I said. There was a long silence after that. Ethan returned to his seat slowly. But he didn't look at me right away. When he finally did, his voice was different. Quieter. "Do you really think that little of us?" he asked. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. I considered the question carefully. "I think you stopped seeing me clearly," I said. Neither of them moved. "You saw what I had," I continued. "You calculated what you needed. And somewhere in that process, you forgot to ask what I wanted." Lauren looked down at the table. "Ethan didn't. I didn't raise you to think that way," I added, my voice still steady. That landed. I could see it in his face. Not guilt, but recognition. "I'm not taking anything away from you," I said after a moment. "I'm simply deciding what belongs to me, while I'm still here to decide it." Lauren let out a slow breath. "So what happens now?" she asked. I folded my hands again, resting them lightly on the table. "Now," I said, "you plan your wedding the way you choose to." "And your fund?" Ethan asked. "It remains exactly where it is." There was nothing more to negotiate. Nothing left to reinterpret. Just a boundary that hadn't existed before. And now, finally, did. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan sat there, staring at the table as if the answers might still be somewhere in front of him, just out of reach. Lauren remained still, her composure carefully held together, but thinner now, like glass under pressure. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I had spent years doing that. Smoothing things over, explaining, making sure no one felt uncomfortable for too long. But this time, I let the quiet stay. Because sometimes, silence says what words cannot. "I didn't think it would go this way," Ethan said finally. His voice was softer now. Not defensive, not demanding. Just uncertain. "I know," I replied. And I meant it. He looked up at me then, searching my face for something, understanding, maybe, or reassurance that this wasn't as final as it felt. "You could have just said no," he added. "We would have understood." I held his gaze. "Would you?" I asked gently. He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. This wasn't about the word no. It was about everything that came before it. Lauren shifted slightly in her chair. "We didn't mean to make you feel like that," she said, choosing her words carefully. "If it came across wrong, we can take a step back." A step back. As if this had only been a step forward. I nodded once. "I appreciate that," I said. And I did. But appreciation wasn't the same as reversal. I reached for my glass of water, taking a small sip before setting it down again. "When your father and I built what we have," I said, looking at Ethan, "we didn't do it so one day someone else could decide how it should be used." He listened quietly. No interruptions this time. "No one is entitled to it," I continued, "not even you." The words weren't harsh. They didn't need to be. They were simply true. Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "I guess I just thought," he started, then stopped. "That it would always be there," he finished. I nodded. "It will be," I said. "Just not in the way you expected." Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different. Not tense. Not sharp. Just clear. Lauren glanced at Ethan, then back at me. "So that's it?" she asked quietly. "That's it," I said. They didn't argue after that. There were no raised voices. No dramatic exits. Just small, careful movements. Chairs sliding back, hands reaching for coats. A few quiet words exchanged that didn't carry much meaning. At the door, Ethan paused. For a second, I thought he might say something more. But instead, He just nodded. "Good night, Mom." "Good night," I replied. And then they were gone. I closed the door gently and stood there for a moment, my hand resting against the wood. The house was quiet again. But not the same kind of quiet as before. This one didn't feel empty. It felt settled. I walked back to the table and began clearing the dishes, one plate at a time. Nothing had been broken. Nothing had been lost. Only something had been seen clearly. And once you see something like that, you don't unsee it. You don't return to how things were. You move forward. Even if it's alone. The wedding was held 3 weeks later. I received an invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant lettering, my name printed properly this time, no assumptions. No hidden meanings, no small details meant to diminish me. Just, my name. Margaret Carter. I placed it on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long moment before deciding I would go. Not for them. For myself. The venue was exactly what they had described. Large, polished, full of soft lighting and carefully arranged flowers that looked as though they had been placed with precision rather than love. Everything was beautiful. Everything was expensive. And everything, I realized as I stepped inside, had been built exactly the way they wanted it. Without me. I didn't feel out of place. I didn't feel unwelcome. I simply felt separate. Like a guest in a story that used to belong to me. Ethan saw me first. He walked over quickly, his expression shifting through something I couldn't quite name, relief, maybe, or uncertainty. "Mom," he said, "you came." I said I would, I replied. He nodded, as if that meant more than either of us was willing to say out loud. Lauren approached a moment later. Her smile controlled, practiced. "Margaret," she said, "thank you for being here." I returned the same level of politeness. "It's a beautiful wedding." And it was. I didn't add anything more. I took my seat during the ceremony and watched quietly. The vows, the music, the way Ethan looked at her. For a brief moment, I saw the boy he used to be. Not the man who sat across from me asking for my retirement fund. Just my son. And I allowed myself to feel that. Not regret. Not longing. Just acknowledgement. Because both things could be true at the same time. At the reception, people approached me. Friends, distant relatives, neighbors. "Margaret, you must be so proud. This is all so beautiful, you must have helped so much." I smiled politely. "I'm happy for them," I said. And that was enough. I didn't correct them. I didn't explain. Some truths don't need an audience. Later in the evening, Ethan found me again. The music was louder now. The lights dimmer. The room filled with laughter and movement. But he stood still in front of me. "Mom," he said, quieter this time, "can we talk?" I nodded. We stepped outside, away from the noise. The air was cool, calm, real. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything." I didn't interrupt. "I didn't see it," he continued, "not the way you did. I thought it was normal. That families just help like that." I listened. Because this time, he was trying. Not perfectly. But honestly. "I'm not asking you to change anything," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I understand it differently now." I looked at him carefully. Not as a mother trying to fix something. But as a woman deciding what to accept. "That matters," I said. And it did. He nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "I don't expect anything," he said. And for the first time since this began, I believed him. I left the wedding early. Not because I was uncomfortable. Not because I didn't belong. But because I didn't need to stay any longer. As I drove home, the night felt quiet in a way that no longer pressed against me. It simply existed. Back in my house, I placed my coat on the chair and walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The same table. The same chair. The same life. But it didn't feel the same. Because I wasn't the same. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. For years, I had believed that love meant giving without limits. That being a mother meant saying yes, even when it cost you something. But now, I understood something different. Love without respect becomes expectation. And expectation, left unchecked, becomes entitlement. I took a slow sip of tea. Warm, steady. Mine. The documents were still in the drawer where I had placed them. Signed, filed, final. I hadn't looked at them again. I didn't need to. Because the decision had already done what it was meant to do. It didn't break my family. It revealed it. I looked out the window as the last lights from passing cars moved across the street. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was losing something. I felt like I had kept it. My peace. My independence. My voice. They asked for my retirement fund to build their future. But in the end, I used it to protect my own. And that made all the difference.